Very favorite to me because I think you are known by your surgical craft, right? So also you are sitting in surgeons here. How many of you are medical students? Can I know that? All right, so majority of you are medical students. Any PGR sitting here? All right, so I have to modify my talk according to this. So I'm going to talk about achieving excellence in a surgical skill, but it can be applied to any skill. So even if you are anesthesia or other guys, you can have that. So I will talk about two things: development of technical skills in surgery, and number two, discuss the process of achieving mastery in that skill. Okay, so remember that the foundation of surgical excellence is dependent on three important pillars. The number one is your core competencies. And when I say core competencies, means your knowledge, judgment, communication, critical thinking. But the most important thing for any surgeon is his technical ability or technical skills he possesses. The second thing is his commitment to evidence-based patient care and passion for lifelong learning. This is the second pillar of surgical excellence. And the third pillar is you need to have professionalism, grit, and personal value. You have to look after that. So a journey of surgical excellence actually is comprising of three pillars which I just mentioned. Anybody recognizes this man? You recognize who is this? There is some problem with the resolution of that. इसकी resolution ठीक करनी पड़ेगी. Okay, so there is some technical glitch, but just so if you don't recognize this is Mozart, right? He was an Austrian musician, and just at the age of 5, he already had this one musical composition as his name. At the age of 3, he was able to play multiple instruments. And what was the reason? Well, the reason was that Mozart was born in a musical family. His father was a musician, his sister was also a musician, and he had an innate talent. So talent's not born. He saw that thing happening in his house. And secondly, his father made sure that he had an education. So he made sure that he got musical training from different musical teachers, although he himself was a great teacher. And the second thing was that Mozart used to do was an extensive practice. Despite that he was a very big name, he used to have multiple hours of sessions of practice. So he used to practice. And the third thing was that he used to travel to different countries and see how their music was. So he used to mix his music, right, with the music. And that's the reason he was able to create 600 genres. Genre से क्या मुराद है? जैसे ये कहते हैं ना, jazz है, rock है, ये सारी सारी. So he is the biggest name in Western classical music. And nobody has yet achieved this status. So how did you achieve this status? By developing mastery in skills of music. So how he understood music, that was the mastery he developed. So my message to you is that if you want to learn some skills, you want to come to surgery, you must aim for that excellence. Otherwise, you would remain very mediocre. You always aim for the stars and you end up in the moon. Right? This is the message, this is the take-home message you should take from my presentation. Now, since I'm going to talk about psychomotor skills and not a cognitive skill, which is basically related to brain, by definition, these are physical movements needing hand-eye coordination. So this is the definition of psychomotor skills. So my question to you is, how did you learn driving? किसी एक को बता शेयर कर सकते हैं मेरे साथ? कोई है? आपने कितनों को ड्राइविंग आती है? You know driving? आपको आती है? Can you share कैसे आपने सीखी? रिमेंबर मेरे वाले साहब की एक जीप थी और मुझे कोई ड्राइविंग नहीं आती थी, ठीक है, लेकिन मैं चैंपियन बनना चाहता, 9th क्लास का स्टूडेंट था, ठीक है। उसको मुझे ये तो पता था कि ये इसको यहाँ पे स्विच ऑन हो जाता है, लेकिन ये मुझे पता था कि न्यूट्रल में भी होनी चाहिए, ठीक है। और वो मेरा ड्राइवर जो था वो एक हमारे घर के पीछे एक थोड़ा सा ऊंची जगह थी, वो वहाँ पे लगा के जाता था। तो मैंने जैसे उसको ऑन किया तो उसके टायर आगे गए और वो ड्रम नीचे गए। सो लर्निंग was banned for the next 1.5 years. It was totally banned. Driving was totally banned on me. But you see, when you learn the driving, right? Initially, what you see, you feel a little bit. There is a need for it, but you are not aware that you don't do it, right? So this is you are unconsciously incompetent. Then आपको पता यार मैंने सुबह साहब ड्यूटी भी छोड़ना है, शायद अपना भी काम करना है. Then you become consciously competent. आपको पता होता है कि मैं consciously incompetent हूँ, I need something, तो आप सीखते हैं, ठीक है? Then when you learn, then you become consciously competent, and ultimately automation पे आप जितना मर्जी बातें करी जा रहे हैं, but you are in automatic mode, right? So you are unconsciously competent, right? This is the way we learn driving, and the journey to novice and expert, as explained by Dreyfus. Dreyfus and Dreyfus, two brothers working in Stanford. So they discussed, they just study the cognitive psychology of how a novice becomes an expert. So he passes through different stages. One was initially was novice, then he's advanced beginner, then he becomes competent. And all surgical residency programs are aimed to producing competent surgeons, right? Or competent resident, who can be assigned the job of a senior registrar. While they are senior registrar, they become proficient, and the journey of mastery continues as a faculty member or as a surgeon. Now, these are 3 stages of motor learning as by Fitz and Posner. You don't need to remember that. This is the simplest way how we teach skills in ATLS, Advanced Trauma Life Support. One of the course director and instructor is sitting, Professor Marie, who is welcome to Gujranwala. Conceptualization is the first step, where you know what is the skill, what are the indications of that skill, what are the contraindications of that skill, what equipment and resources I will need, what environment I will need, and then you verbalize during demonstration while the teacher is performing. And then you demonstrate, see the demonstration by the teacher, and then you do it, and then others see it, and then you practice it, you get a corrective feedback, and then ultimately autonomy and mastery, right? So in ATLS, we just aim at a little bit autonomy, and the mastery is a lifelong journey. Now, when we learn a surgical procedure, you always go through 4 phases of surgical procedure. The first one is a cognitive, where after reading certain things and watching videos, you make a mental representation or a mental model in your mind, right? Then there's a learning curve. The second phase is learning curve. You start doing it, but initially you are very reluctant, you are very careful that you might not develop any complications and stuff like that. And the third phase is consolidation phase. You don't need any supervision, but you are doing progressively complex cases. And last is an expert phase, which goes for lifelong. And this is an important thing for you to understand. Whenever you learn some skill, there's always a learning curve. And this learning curve is dependent on how much basically is the number. So initially, there would be low number, and your learning would be, your outcome will also be a little bit roggy. But as you develop number, you become more fluent, and your outcomes are better. And once you achieve a certain desired level of competence, it stays there, right? So the question number 1 is, how should I get a skill training during my surgery? That's the question number 1. And most of you are PTRs are sitting here. So the standard way these days is that you need to have a supervised apprenticeship. This is the model which you have been using. Problem ये है, जैसे अगर आप किसी ने दर्जी का काम सीखना है, ठीक है? तो स्टैंडर्ड तरीकाकार क्या है दर्जी के काम सिखाने का? कि आपने देखा वो आपकी माँ जो है वो अपने बच्चे को दर्जी के पास छोड़ देती है जाके, और उसकी वो 6 महीने साल मैकेनिक छोटे से बच्चे आपने देखा होगा, उनकी कोई एजुकेशन नहीं है और उनको दुकानों में छोड़ दिया जाता है और वो मैकेनिक बनते हैं. एंड हाउ डू दे बिकम मैकेनिक? उनको कुछ साइंटिफिक ट्रेनिंग नहीं हो रही थी. दे जस्ट ऑब्जर्विंग एंड इमिटेटिंग, एंड they are part of that environment. Just as Mozart was in an environment, it is very, very important for you to be immersed in that environment. So इसलिए आप जो है Google पे बैठ के या घर पे बैठ के डॉक्टर नहीं बन सकते. Immersion in the wards, immersions in the emergency theaters, immersions in the operation theater is essential for you to become skillful, right? Now, after training skills acquisition is very, very difficult one, and this is for all my surgeons sitting in front. So how do I learn a new skill or a new procedure, right? So again, the first phase is a cognitive phase. So read something, watch multiple videos, see a master doing, and assist a master surgeon. The second phase is practice on a simulator, which could be a very simple one, जो hand छोटा वाला, या specific one, जो कि specifically उसी procedure के लिए बनाओ. Then you deconstruct the skill and try to do those simple steps under a proctor. And then you do the whole procedure under a proctor with the supervision. And then you finally do it independently, but remember there is still a role of coach. You have to invite somebody to see while you are operating. And ultimately you must can send your video to a master for a review. And frequently you need to send it. This is the way you can develop a mastery in this important thing. And always remember that you keep reflecting and auditing your outcomes. There are certain factors that will impact the acquisition of psychomotor skills. And सबसे बड़ा stress, fatigue, etc. So my PGRs and my सर वो हम तो सारी रात 24 घंटे जो है वो काम करते रहे उसके बाद yes. So if you are overworked and fatigued and stressed, it is going to impact both the performance and acquisition of it. But importantly, you need to have some talent, right? And the task should not be very difficult. And you have to have the motivation or self-efficacy to continue and persist with that task. So there are certain factors that impact the skill acquisition. This is I mentioned here. Now, that was a part to tell you how to acquire a skill. The second part of my talk is how to acquire expertise. So there are three ways we can develop surgical expertise. Number one is a concept called deliberate practice, and nowadays we can use deliberate practice using simulations, right? So instead of learning on the patient, you can learn outside the theater environment on the simulator so that you improve the patient safety. Second, there is always a role of a coach and the feedback provided by that coach. And lastly, the activities of practice. जब हमने surgical society बनाई हुई है या oncology society बनाई हुई है, ये जो groups बनाए हुए हैं, they are very, very important. I learn a lot even from the WhatsApp group of SOSPK because every time somebody is contributing, so as a community of surgeons, we are learning from each other. So this is another way of keeping you abreast with the mastery. Now, I recommend all of you who are in the surgical field to read this book, and this book is Peak by Anders Ericsson. Ericsson died about 3 years back. This is one of the great books I have read. I have read it multiple times, and every time I read a different perspective. It is available. It is the book which you all read. So he has studied the science of expertise, and what he found that how you develop into a super athlete like Roger Federer. वो क्या चीज़ है जो कि आपको रॉजर फेडरर की कहानी, जावेद मियांदाद की कहानी, ये जो बाबर आजम की कहानी, they are all the same. Roger Federer was also a ball boy. Javed Miandad was also a ball boy, right? And Babar Azam is also a ball boy. Right in the beginning, they were exposed to this environment, right? And the fundamental things which they did, they have these 4 characteristics. And you will be surprised that expert surgeons all possess these 4 characteristics. They have a mindset, right? They have a grit or resilience. Then they use deliberate practice, right? And we'll talk about what is deliberate practice. And then they always invite a coach or a coaching to become experts. Now, there is no question about the role of simulation. There's a lot of data that simulation shortens the learning curve and improves efficiency. I don't need to go into that. And you might have attended this FLS. It has changed the laparoscopic training. And this could be transferred to other surgical training as well. So this is the same, it shortens the learning curve, simulation. The second is coaching. I would recommend that all of you should have your coach. Abhi main principal bana, so one of my friends from state, he said, Farooq, in US, everybody has a coach. This is a new assignment, you need a coach. So I'm very, very lucky that I had that coach. And coach, what does it do? It shortens your learning curve, improve performance, develop and maintain expertise, and energizes you, keeps you at the door, keeps you at the highest door. Now, this is the last concept I want you to remember. This is about the deliberate practice. Concept we have taken from the peak, from Andy's direction. Whenever you want to learn a skill and want to have mastery in that skill, the first thing is you deconstruct the skill. Set a goal. Create mental models. Get a focused practice. I will give you an example. Get a constructive feedback from the coach. Reflect and set new goals. So, अगर आपने टेनिस सीखनी है, तो टेनिस एकदम से नहीं आप सीखेंगे. टेनिस के अंदर आप समझेंगे अच्छा मैंने आज बैक हैंड सीखना है. So आप बैक हैंड उठाएं, देखें how the back hands be done, watch videos and practice a back and ask the coach, see how is my back hand, give me my feedback. After he's done that, practice it, go back in the evening, think about what was my wrong, what is the adjustment I need to do, and come back and practice next time again with a new goal. So this focused practice, having a set goal, and focusing only on one aspect is going to improve your, this is called deliberate practice. Now, two things you need to remember when you're learning. One is this is called GEMCON'23-Dr law. अगर आप किसी के ऊपर बहुत ज़्यादा प्रेशर डालें तो तुमने आज के ही दिन सीखनी है, मैथ्स प्रैक्टिस एक दिन में आपको कोई चीज़ नहीं आएगी. What will happen? It will increase your stress level. Optimum stress level is essential, but if the stress level is too much, your performance goes down. So एक चीज़ आपने याद रखनी है कि एक वक्त में बहुत ज़्यादा नहीं कोशिश करना है सीखने की. The other thing which I want to remember, you to remember, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning-Kruger effect क्या है कि जब आप कुछ चीज़ सीखते हैं, लो एबिलिटी वाले लोग अपने बारे में मिस असेस करते हैं कि थोड़ा कुछ आता है, ठीक है? तो इसलिए जैसे मैंने कोई एक दो लैब गोली देख ली है और मैंने स्टडी स्टार्ट की है, तो मैं कहूँ आज यार आज फटियाँ बन जाएंगे, आज जितना मर्जी कॉम्प्लिकेशन केस लिया मैंने, because I have a misperception about my competence. This is called Dunning-Kruger. It gives you very confident. अंदर का आपने सीखा कुछ, जैसे आपने स्लीप की वीडियो देख ली, आपने कहा ओह ये तो कोई मसला नहीं है, मैंने आज ही इसको स्लीप कर लिया, because you are very confident that I can do that. There is another drawback to it, that when you are too much competent, then you try to know that you say, oh यार मुझे तो कुछ नहीं आता, ठीक है? This is called imposter syndrome. So extreme of both are not good. So remember, if you are capable, you keep on improving your capabilities, but never ever underestimate that. The underestimation of your capacity and capabilities right in the beginning is what we have to avoid. So in summary, if you want to learn a skill, this is the first phase, the cognitive phase, make a mental model. This is the second phase, learning curve. And if you want to shorten your learning curve, use simulation. And this is the third phase, deliberate practice and reflection. And lastly, the expert phase, when you teach others, right? When you teach others, it adds to your own skill set, right? We continue with this. And lastly, always, despite you becoming an expert, there is a TED talk by Atul Gawande on the role of a coach, even if you are an expert. You must watch that. So you can ask somebody, Atul Gawande did 2,000 thyroidectomies, and after that he asked somebody, a teacher, to see how is he performing without knowing that he is being watched. Right? So this is the way people improve their studying that. Last my quote is, and this is my own personal quote, right? So excellence is an attitude and expertise is a lifelong journey. I thank you very much for your patience.